This is a reading of the article Fertilized World by Dan Charles for National Geographic. Nitrogen, element symbol N. We can't see it or taste it, but it is in our stomachs. It helps our farms and feeds our people. Without this element, plants would not be able to do photosynthesis. Our body would not be able to make new molecules, and no plant could grow. Corn, wheat, and rice are fast-growing crops on which humans depend for survival. These plants need a lot of nitrogen to grow. Modern chemistry has allowed us to make big factories that take in nitrogen from the atmosphere and turn it into the kind of molecule our plants need to survive. This molecule that factories make is nitrogen fertilizer. More than 100 million tons of nitrogen fertilizer are put on crops worldwide every year to improve our harvest. Without nitrogen fertilizer, our current human population would not continue living. Our planet's soil cannot grow enough food for all 7 billion of us. In fact, almost half of the nitrogen found in our body's muscles and organs started out in a fertilizer factory. However, the miracle of fertilizer comes with a price. The nitrogen that washes away from the fields are harming the wildlife in lakes and streams, polluting our groundwater, and even warming our globe's climate, or average weather. The nitrogen problem is easy to see in China, a country that loves its food and worries that supplies might run out. To visitors, it might not seem like they have a problem with food because they have feasts in the street fairly often. But the Chinese people will tell you that they do not always eat this well. Sometimes, when the adults were young, they were lucky to get 3 bowls of rice. This is because of China's Great Famine, which lasted from 1959 to 1961 and killed about 30 million people. This happened because of a drought, which is when there is not enough water. The drought was mainly caused by their leader, Chairman Mao. He controlled the farms and forced them to use all of their resources up. The famine ended, but food was still hard to find until the late 1970s, when farmers took back control of their crops. However, these farmers ran into another problem, the limits of their land. As the country's population grew by an astounding 300 million people between 1970 and 1990, China's traditional farms struggled to feed everyone. An elderly farmer remembers what his harvest used to be using traditional farming methods, but now his harvest is much bigger because of nitrogen fertilizers. The Chinese government decided to build hundreds of nitrogen fertilizer factories between 1975 and 1995 to help farms grow more food. Since there is so much fertilizer, farms use a lot of it. They don't think about if there could be a bad effect for the environment. Scientists know that nitrogen can be bad for the environment. When there is too much, it washes away and collects in our streams and air. The same elderly farmer remembers catching fish as a boy. The river was so clean, you could see right through it, he says. By 1980, you couldn't see the fish anymore. The reason the river was cloudy is because the nitrogen was feeding a very small animal called phytoplankton. These phytoplankton were having a lot of babies, and their population grew to be very big. Another thing in the water whose population grows from the extra fertilizer is toxic bacteria. Scientists are teaching China about the dangers of pollution from too much fertilizer. The scientists are working with small groups of farmers to teach them to use less fertilizer. But it is hard to convince everyone to use less. The results of using fertilizer are just too good. The world will probably keep using fertilizer for years to come, but we have to find ways to use it safely, otherwise the problem will only grow to be really big. There is hope, though. A couple who live in Iowa own a farm that doesn't use any factory-made fertilizer. Their solution was to put nitrogen into the soil naturally. They added plants who naturally have bacteria that live on their roots. This bacteria changes the nitrogen from the atmosphere into a form that plants can use in the soil. This couple grows very healthy crops that are big. But this method does have a cost. One is that this natural process works more slowly than a nitrogen factory. Also, these plants that have the bacteria on their roots don't sell for as much money. This means they have to sell their organic, fertilizer-free crops for more money to make enough to live. In the United States, there are people who are willing to pay that price for organic crops. But this will not work in China, where people do not have as much money. In Africa, where most villages cannot afford to buy fertilizer and many people are hungry, the focus of the village is to grow food that has the most nutrients. This is usually corn or rice. The problem is that these plants take a lot of nitrogen out of the soil. Then, when they go to grow crops the next year, the soil does not have enough nutrients. This makes the crops smaller. After a few years, the soil will lose all its nutrients. This will make it very hard to feed the people of the village. African villages need fertilizer in order to grow enough food for their people, but they cannot afford it. Some people think the wealthy countries should buy it for them or sell it to them for less money. In 2006, nitrogen was sold to Malawi for less money, but it still created problems and the government started running out of money. They have started to try the natural method like the couple in Iowa. They have planted crops that have the bacteria that put nitrogen into the soil. This is a 10-year-old experiment. It did work, and the soil had more nutrients and the next year's corn harvest was larger. This was a big success, but it does not happen easily. It takes a lot of education on how these nitrogen-fixing plants work. But after 20 years of hard work, people have changed the way they farm. It is hard to believe that it was 100 years ago that Fritz Haber first learned how to capture nitrogen from the air to make fertilizer. This seemed like an easy shortcut for growing a lot of food, but new limits on nitrogen are appearing. The solution for this problem is probably not going to come from a laboratory, but instead from learning how to use natural processes.